In this lesson, we complete the REST actions for the user's resource by adding edit, update, index, and destroy actions. We start by giving users the ability to update their profiles, which also provides a natural opportunity to enforce an authorization model made possible by the authentication code from lessons 8 and 9. Then we make a listing of all users, which will give us a reason to learn how to seed the database with sample users. Finally, we add the ability to destroy users, wiping them clear from the database. Since we can't allow just any user to have such dangerous powers, we take care to create a special class of administrative users authorized to perform such dangerous tasks. In this lesson, we'll complete the REST actions for the user's resource by adding edit, update, index, and destroy actions. We'll start by giving users the ability to update their profiles, which will also give us a natural opportunity to enforce an authorization model made possible by the authentication code developed in the last lesson. Then we'll make a listing of all users on the site, which will involve creating sample data so that the resulting page is more like what we'd expect on a real site. Finally, we'll add the ability to destroy users, together with a privileged class of administrators authorized to use such dangerous powers. Let's get started by reviewing the correspondence between HTTP requests and URLs in our REST architecture. So here's a table of the different kinds of requests, the URLs, and then the corresponding actions and named routes. So far what we've looked at is this here. We've looked at get/user/1, that's the show page or the profile page. We've done get/user/new, this is the registration page, or the page for sign up. We did post here, so that's this here. We did post to the user's path. This is something that happens automatically as the result of form 4 in the sign up page. So what we haven't done is this here, this get/users for the user's index. This here, the edit page /user/1/edit. That's also a GET request. But then there are these two requests that we have limited experience with. There's delete, which we've mentioned briefly. Remember, we deleted sessions in the last lesson. So we have a little experience with this destroy action. But in this case, we're actually going to be removing the user from the database here. The sessions we deleted in a different way. We just removed it from the cookies. And then we've got this patch request. So this patch request is used for updating information in the HTTP standard. And so here we patch to /user/1, and that gets routed to the update action. Let's make a new branch for this lesson. Just call it updating users for short. We'll do all of the stuff in this lesson on this branch. Now let's get started with the edit form. This will be our first step, is to handle this get/user/1/edit. Gets routed to the edit action. This will closely parallel the work that we did before with this user sign up. So it's going to be very similar to this get/user/new. In fact, let's just take a look at that. Can split it here. And then we can make the analogous page here. We need to actually create it by hand. If you look over here, you can see it's not there. It's sample app, views, users. We have new and show, but not edit. So the corresponding file for the edit action is edit.html.erb, so let's touch that. Actually, we can just do it this way. Let's just do it here, since we've already navigated here. There we go, and let's open it up over here. Let's take a look at a mock-up to get a sense of where we're going here. This is a mock-up of the update your profile page. You can see there's a field there for name, email, password confirmation, and then a submit button, save changes. And then at the bottom here, we've got a Gravatar image with a change link. So if we take a look at the actual sign up page, you can See how similar that is right here. So you can see that it's almost exactly the same. So we can get a good start just by copying this code here from the new page. Let's do that. This makes you a little unhappy. It probably should. And in fact, turning this into a partial is left as an exercise in chapter 9 of the book. So let's call this edit user. Change the H1. Update your profile. This is all the same. The error messages is even the same. In fact, everything in here is the same, except for this here, this text in the submit. And then we also want to put a link to the gravatar. So let's do that here. Where's that going to, it's going to go, yeah, it's going to go inside here. Let's give it a class so that we can style it, gravatar edit class, and then gravatar for @user. So it turns out the right URL for this is gravatar.com/emails. This uses the gravatar for helper. Just remind ourselves what that looks like. So remember, this takes in a user, calculates the MD5 hex digest based on the email, and then returns an image tag with the user's gravatar. In order to get this to work, we need to edit the user's controller. It's here. The edit action will be almost the same as the new action. In fact, we can just copy it here. Let's go here. And then instead of creating a new user, what we want to do is find the user, just like we did here on the show page. In fact, we can just copy that. So this will find the user based on the param. So the params come from here. Because the URL is /user/the ID of the user /edit, there will be a params of ID available. So let's take a look at that. Save that, and actually we're ready to look at it. Oh, we have to log in though, don't we? Actually, we don't have to log in. Let me show you that. Let's do this /user/1/edit. We should have to log in, and that's one of the things we'll be doing in this lesson, is making it so this page is protected. This is strange. I did not expect this error. Let's see if we can figure it out. Oh, it could be this user doesn't exist. Let's take a look. Here's a console in this tab. It's a user account. Okay, there's a user. Huh, and it does have ID 1. I don't know what's going on here. Oh, I see the problem. So let's take a look at the page again. You can see that it says edit.html.erb line 6. It's complaining that there's no @user here. So I looked over here. I was like, well, we're finding it right here, except that I forgot to change this. You probably noticed that, but I did not. So let's change this to edit instead of new. Now it should work. Great, there we go. You can see that the form here is pre-filled with the name and email address of the @user. Let's take a look at the source of that form. Inspect it here. So here's the form. You can see the input fields here are the same as we had for the sign up page. Right? There's username, user email, password, and so on. There's a slight difference here in the form tag. There's an action instead of /users, the action is /users/1, indicating that we're editing user 1. But you might notice here that it says that the method is post. But if we look at this table, this is supposed to be a patch request, patch to /users/1. So the reason for that is that browsers can't actually send patch requests natively. If you look here, there's actually an input field with a hidden type that says value equals patch. So this is how Rails fakes a patch request inside of a browser. And because of this, the Rails router here in resources users knows to route this request here, this patch request, to the right action in the user's controller. So that's this patch to this will get routed to the update action. Now, at this point, you might be wondering, if you really think about this, how it is that Rails knew to use that extra form to put in the extra input field for the patch request, because this code here in the user sign-up page is exactly the same as the edit page. So what distinguishes these two? And the answer is that this user already exists in the database, and Rails can tell that. So there's a way to do that. Let's go to here it is. And we want to look at the new record method. So this is user.new.newRecord. It's a Boolean, so question mark. That's a new record, and then we can also do user.first. That's false. So it's possible to tell based on the value of the new record method whether a user is new. So over here, that gets used to build a post request to /users, and over here it gets used to build a patch request to /user/1. Now you may recall for logged in users, if let's log in here, there's a link to the settings here. What we'd like for this to be is a link to the edit page, so that's /user/1/edit. And the way we can get that is by using the named route edit user path of user. And in this case, it'll be edit user path of current user. So let's look at the header. That's in here, link to settings. So here it's stubbed out, but now so if we save that, we should be able to refresh the page here and actually have that link work. Cool. Now, as usual with a form like this, our first step is to handle an unsuccessful submission. So let's go over here. This is going to be in the user's controller. We're done with this stuff here. So what we need here is an update action. And it will be very similar to create, so let's just make sure we can take a look at that. We're going to make an @user, but instead of user.new of user params, it's going to be user.find params of ID. And then instead of saying if @user.save, we're going to say if @user.update attributes. Remember, update attributes takes a hash, and just like user.new, it's dangerous. You could potentially set an admin flag, for example, and we'll actually talk about that in this lesson. So we want to do the same thing here. Instead of doing params of user, we want to use the strong parameters, user params. Remember, this thing returns true if the update succeeds. So we can handle that later. Else, just as we render back the new form here, we're just going to render back the edit form. We'll save that, and it should be working if we submit. This is invalid because there's no password, so let's just click that and see what happens. Look at that, because we reuse so much code, even our error handling works because we've got this partial here. Right, our shared error messages partial works just as well for the edit page as it did for the new page. And if we remove this, we can get different errors, get more errors. There we go. It's a good idea at this point to write a quick test for what we just did so we don't have to keep submitting it. Let's make an integration test here. let's call it users edit for the various things related to editing users. When getting started with a new test, it's always a good idea to look at what we did before, just to orient ourselves. So here's test integration. Let's look at the closest analog, which is the sign-up test. So here's user sign-up test, users edit test over here. So here's a test for invalid sign-up. We're going to do the same thing here. We're going to test unsuccessful edit. I guess we could call it invalid edit, but I'm going to use slightly different wording here. Oops. Sometimes it creates that end, sometimes it doesn't. Actually, I haven't figured out why exactly. So what do we need to do here? Instead of getting the sign-up path here, we need to be able to get the edit path. So that's edit user path of user, which means we need a user. So the way we've handled that before, let's see, we can look at that here. In the login test, we defined a setup method that pulled out the user from the fixtures. So that's in test fixtures users.yaml. It's this here. So we're going to pull that user out again in this test. We just paste in that setup. And so we can do get edit user path of @user. So that's just clicking onto this page here. And now instead of sending a post request, we want to send a patch. And of course, we don't need this assert no difference because we're not going to change the user count for sure. This is just editing a user, not creating one. So let's issue a patch request to, well, which path is it? It's /user/1, which is that's the user path. So we send a patch to that, and then we need to give it this parameters hash, this params. This is the argument. So user, and anything invalid is fine. In fact, we can just copy this, the same thing. And there are lots of things we could test at this point, but I'm just going to test that the right template is rendered. So that's the edit template. Save that, and actually that should run. Here we go. Oh, one error. Oh, right, so here I did user path user. So what happened here is that I just copied from here, but of course there is no user variable, there's an @user. So let's do that. Now it should pass. Yep, now it's green. Can run the whole test suite. Oops. Yeah, this happens sometimes. There's an error connecting to the Spring server, so I found that if you just run it again, it works usually. All right, the test suite is green now, and at this point we're ready to move on to successful edits. This is the sort of thing that as you get more comfortable with testing, I think you'll find yourself more likely to write the test first. And in this context, an integration test like this is sometimes called an acceptance test. The distinction is usually that with things like controller tests or model tests, you're writing like one test at a time or just really fine-grained functionality. This will actually just be one, but this is going to be a broader test of a bunch of different things all going right at the same time. And so the idea is that once it's working, that means we've accepted the feature. So let's take a look at this. I want to show you how to do that. So what does the successful edit look like? Oops, I need to put the do in. Well, we get the user path. It's the same thing here. And then we're going to send a patch request It's the same thing here. But now we want to have valid information. So let's put in a valid different name from the one that's used here, right? So this is Michael example. Let's put in foo bar. And let's put in, do this here. It's valid, and then, you know, one of the things I want to do here, so this is a little tricky, but when you click this, it's really convenient to be able to update your information without putting in your password. So I'm going to put in blank password and password confirmation. So this is my expectation. This is the acceptance test. I want this to update the name and email of the user. Now we have to make some decisions about what the behavior should be after a successful edit. So one thing I'd like to do is say that it should redirect back to the profile page. So that's sort of redirected to @user. And let's plan to put in a flash message just indicating that there was a successful update. Okay, we could test the actual key, but I feel like that's over specifying it. So let's just assert that it's not empty. And then what we want to do is verify that this user actually has an updated name and email address. This is the sort of case where I really do like to write an acceptance test, but it's a little tricky. So this is why it requires some experience. We're going to have to reload the user, or else its attributes won't be updated. So if we were to do this, assert equal @user.name, and then what we expect it to be here, that will not actually work. We have used this reload method before, but this is the kind of thing that would be really easy to forget. So let me show you how to do that. What I want to do is reload it and then put these assertions in. Email, and then just copy this here. All right, so what this does is it reloads the user and pulls it out of the database, the test database, and then verifies that in fact the name and email address have been updated. So you can save this and go red. So that's good. Now let's go over to the controller, and here, instead of handle a successful update, let's put in the flash message. In fact, you know what? I actually put these in the wrong order, because it doesn't really matter, but we have to set the flash first and then redirect, so I like the parallel structure here. So if we do this here, we assert that the flash isn't empty, so let's set the flash here. And this is a success, so let's do success, be green, nice and happy. Just put in something sensible, and then redirect to the user. Save that. Oops, this will still work. I haven't saved this here since changing the order. All right, we're still red here. So this is part of the value of an acceptance test. He's like, okay, well, why is it still red? Because we think this should work. And the reason is because we can't handle these yet. This is, you can see here, expected to be a redirect, and the reason for that is because the user model currently requires that we have a password and password confirmation. But there's a way to do this. Here in the validations, we have validates password length minimum 6. For precisely this kind of case, Rails allows you to say allow blank true. Now you might wonder, well, won't this let people create new users, like sign up without a password? And the answer is no, because HowSecurePassword supplies a password presence validation. So if we save this and go over here and save this, let's see if we're green. All right, so we're actually green now. You can see both the user test, which ran when I saved this file here, the user file, user.rb, and this integration test passed. Now, one thing I don't like here is this duplication. It makes me a little unhappy, so I'm going to define some variables. Let's refactor our test a little bit. This is the sort of thing ordinarily I would probably do it ahead of time because I would anticipate that I was going to reuse them. But this is the way you might figure out that you needed to do that. Name of name, email, email. And the same thing here. All right, it's working. So let's take a look at it. I can change the name here. Change it to my name, and I'll change it to my email address. And I can leave the password and confirmation blank if I want. Save changes. There we go. Nice success message, profile updated, and of course it's using the gravatar that I associated with my primary email address. If I wanted to change that gravatar, I can go over here, back to the settings, and just click on here. This will prompt me to sign in. And you can see here, this is where the gravatars are. So I can add a new image, I can associate it with my email address if I want to, and so on. One thing you might have noticed there is that it opened in the same window. And there are divergent philosophies on this. Of course, I could just open it in a new tab by doing something like this, just right click, or I could do command click. But it is nice in this context sometimes just to open it up in a new tab automatically, and there is a way to do that. Let me show you how to do that. It's a pretty common thing to want to do. So the way to do it, this works cross-platform. I think it's not actually technically valid HTML, but this works really well. This is the target equals blank trick. Target equals, and then there's an underscore blank. This is just HTML. This is not Rails or anything like that. So let's save this, and I believe this will work. So if I refresh the page here and click on it, it should open in a new tab. There we go. So in this context, since we're really going out to a third-party site, it's probably a nice design choice to open it in a new tab automatically. Of course, even though we're allowing blank password and confirmation, you can also use this form to update your password. This is great progress, but of course there's a serious problem. Let's just copy this URL. We alluded to this earlier in the lesson. If I log out here and paste in this URL, oh, no, I want to go to the edit page. /user/1/edit. There we go. Yeah, so this is a serious problem because you can see I'm not logged in, and yet here I am updating the profile of user number 1. So in this next section, we're going to talk about, in addition to authentication, which is logging in, authorization, which lets us control what users can do. In this case, there is no current user, there's no user logged in, so this is the sort of page we would want to protect from unauthorized access. Let's look at a mock-up of what should happen if somebody tries to access this update the profile page, this edit page. What we'd like to do is redirect the user to the login page and then have a flash message that indicates what needs to happen. In this case, please log in. The way to do this is what's called a before filter. Let's go into the controller here, the user's controller. So what we're going to do is add a before filter. And this actually used to be called before filter, but now it's called before action because it's a standard behavior that happens before particular actions. before action, and what we do here is we give it a symbol that's the name of the before filter. In this case, I'm going to say it's logged in user. That's what I want to indicate that it should be a logged in user. And most of these pages do not require a user, right? This show, new, create, we do not need a logged in user for these, so it should just be these two, the edit and update actions. So we can say only, and then give it an array of symbols corresponding to the actions that we want to protect with this before filter. And then at the bottom, in this private section, I'm going to add some before filters. We'll add more later on. So I'd just like to put a comment in. All right, so what should happen here? Well, unless the user is logged in, we should redirect to the login URL. That's this here from our mockup. And we should put a flash message in here first. So this is really going to be a danger. This could be someone trying to break in. Plus, it really is just the kind of thing that I like the color. It's the red color. So let's put in a flash message unless logged in. So unless, remember we have this helper, our sessions helper. We've got this nice helpful logged in question mark method. Unless logged in, we want to make a flash message. Please log in, and then we should redirect to the login URL. Now you might notice that our test suite just went red. See if you can guess why. We can look in the test here. So this is the well, we can see what went red. So it's the user's edit test. The first one is line 15. Actually, that's the second one, but you can see here this is not working. It's saying assert template user's edit, but in fact what happened, it says rendering with, I don't even know what that is. It's kind of strange. And the other one is, let's see, line 27, assert redirected to @user, but in fact it was redirected to the login page. Oh, and I know what this is now. This is saying that it was just that nothing was rendered, and that's true. It says assert template, but because it was a redirect, actually no template got rendered. So the reason for this is we just put in this filter requiring that users be logged in, but in fact users aren't logged in here. So to get that to work, remember we've got a helper for this. In test helper, we have a login as method. So let's put that to use here. Where is it here? So let's log in. Oops, log in as @user. It's going to be the same thing in both of these. Oops, I put it in the wrong place here. Our test will catch that though. We should have one failure now. Oops, wait a minute. That's really weird. I expected that to be red. Let me save this. That's really strange. Oh, I know why. So we actually should probably add a test here. So what happened here is that this is getting the edit user path and it's getting redirected. Then it's logging in, and then it's issuing a direct patch request to the user path. But so this is actually the only thing that requires the user to be logged in. So we should probably, after get edit user path, we should have assert we should do this. We should have another assertion. We should assert template user's edit. There we go. That'll catch it. So this should go red. Yeah, so that's good. And so now we can move this to the right place. Great. Let's check the behavior of our application. Go here. Actually, I can just refresh this, but yeah, let's just do that. Refresh this. It should redirect. There we go. Please log in. Great. It's usually a good idea when you add something security related just to double check that in fact the test suite goes red if you comment it out. You can see here, in fact, the test suite is not red, it's green. So as useful as integration tests are, I feel like it's really important to have an extra layer, especially with anything that involves security. I think it's good to have access control tests at the controller level. So let's take a look at that, show you what I mean by that. This is integration. We want test controllers, users controller. Now we could actually incorporate these tests into an integration test, but I think it's a lot clearer to put them in the controller test, because what we really want to emphasize here is how we're handling the access to each of these actions. So in this case, what we want to do is issue a GET request to the edit page, or the edit action rather, and issue a patch request directly to update, and verify in both cases that if the user isn't logged in, they get redirected to the login URL. So to do that, we need to do this first. We need to have an @user. And then let's test the redirection for the edit and update actions. So here we want to get the edit page directly. The way, remember, that we do GET requests inside controllers is, or controller tests, is different from the integration test. So here we do a GET with the edit user path, but here we're dealing with just the actions. This is a limitation of controller tests, of course, that we can only get these actions for a particular controller, but in this case it's really nice to have a correspondence between the actions here in the test and the actions in the actual controller. So I'm going to get edit, give it an ID, the ID of @user. We could do @user.id, this will work, but as is often the case in Rails, there's an implicit conversion to the ID, and I want to assert that it's redirected to the login URL. Save this. You can see we have a failure there. And actually, we can be really fine-grained here if we want. We can uncomment this and get rid of this. Save that. Now it should be green, because now we're protecting edit. Right? And we can do the same thing for update. Here we issue a patch request to update. We need to give it an ID, and we need to give it a user hash with name and email. This actually fits. You can see it's just only 77 columns. And then we want the same thing, assert redirected to login URL. So this should go red. We got an exception here. What happened? Oh, I see. You can see here that it says that test should redirect edit when not logged in is already defined, and that's because I forgot to change the name here. This should say update. Save that. Now it should be green. I'm sorry, it should be red. We got to red, and now we want to do this. Now it should be green. Great. This is another one of those things that as you gain experience with testing, I do recommend writing first. Access control is exactly the kind of thing that can go horribly wrong and give malicious users complete access to your site. But whether you write the tests before the application code or after, I think it's essential to write good tests for anything security related, including access control. Let's run the full test suite again just to double check. All right, we're good to go. Now, if you think about the current state of the application, there's still a huge security problem, which is that we're only verifying that users are logged in. we're not verifying their identity as the particular user associated with the account. So right now, any user could edit any other user. Of course, there's only one in our development database. But still, this is a potentially huge problem. And in the spirit of what I just said, we're going to write a test first to catch this problem, and then we're going to make sure that the user trying to edit a particular page, like this, here, is in fact the user associated with the page. Why didn't that work? Oh, because I changed the information, didn't I? So this here, we want to make sure that users can only edit their own profiles. So this is what the test would look like. Something like this. Test should redirect edit when logged into the wrong user. So we want to log in as some other user. Say @otherUser. But of course, we don't have another user right now, so let's take care of that. Let's look at our users.yaml. What we want to do now is define a second user here in the test database. So we just copy this here. So our second user will be named Archer. Name Sterling Archer. Email Duchess at example.gov. And remember, we standardized on the same password for every user here in the test database. So now we can go over here, save that, and other user is users of the symbol corresponding to that user, which is Archer. I'd like to line these up. All right, so now we have an other user, log in as that user, and then get edit, oops, the symbol, and we need to give it an ID. This ID is just this here. Look over here. That's this here. It takes a little experience learning how to build up these URLs inside the controller test, because in the integration test we can just use the helper, just use the route, the named route. But here we actually have to go a little bit lower level. So if we do this, we should get the same behavior. We should be redirected to the login URL. Save that. We should go red. In fact, let's just do 2 at a time. This is the way I would really do it. I would probably just write both of these. Let's remember to change this time. Last time I forgot. I almost said we forgot, but of course you probably remembered. You probably noticed, but I did not. In this case, log in as other user, and we can just copy this, the same thing, the same patch request to the update action, and the same behavior. So what we've done here is we've logged in as the wrong user, and then we're trying to hit the edit and update pages for the first user, and we want that to be the same sort of access control problem. We should redirect to the login URL and require that the user log in. And actually it just occurred to me that's not the behavior we want. Like, if you think about it, this is the sort of thing here that is a perfectly normal thing. Like, someone might just roll into the website or like paste in the URL, but then turn out not to be logged in. But here, this is someone trying to edit a page that doesn't belong to them. So instead of encouraging them to log in, we want to discourage them from doing this. So instead of redirecting to the login URL, let's redirect them to the root URL. We will not put a flash message in either. We didn't test for that up here. Maybe we should actually. Well, actually, no, we tested for the flash over here. We're already testing for that. Right. Oh, no, we're not. We know we should test for that. We should do this. We should say assert not nil, not empty. So flash.empty. And put that here as well. And then down here we can assert that these are empty flashes. Save that. All right, we're red as required. So now we want to add another filter here. We have before action logged in user. Now let's define a second before filter. Here we have logged in user. Let's do before action correct user. And again, it's only edit and update. Go down here. So how do we test if the user is right? Well, first of all, we need to grab the user out of the params. Remember, we have params of ID. We actually didn't look at that, but of course, because of this /1 in the URL, we've got ID of 1. So pull out params of ID. And then we want to make sure that the user, this at user, is the same as the current user. So remember, we've already protected this and made it required that the user be logged in. So that means that there should be a current user. So we can do this. We can redirect to the root URL unless this user that we just pulled out of the database here is equal to the current user. Let's save that, and we should be green. Great. Now that we've got this passing, I'd like to add a minor refinement. I really like to have a helper for this. I feel like it's just a little more elegant to write something like this, unless current user, oops, question mark at user. So unless this user is the current user, redirect to the root URL, and so let's take a look at the sessions helper where I'm going to put this. Doesn't really matter too much where we put it. Let's put it after remember. And this should take a user variable and get rid of that at there. So this returns true if the user here, which is the argument, matches the current user. So if we save this and then save this, we should still be green. Great. So this is exactly the sort of thing. It's really error prone, just getting all the little details right. It's so great to have a test suite. There's one more thing I want to do that is also the sort of thing that is great to have a test suite for. You might notice now that I'm pulling an at user out of the database, which means that I can get rid of these lines here. You can see there's some duplication here, or there's an at user being pulled out. But both of these edit and update actions are being filtered through this correct user before filter. So that means that they're getting access to this instance variable, this at user. So I can actually get rid of these, and the test suite should still be passing. That's very promising. Let's run the whole thing just to be double sure. All right. It's always nice to try that out in the browser. Let's do that. And actually, I want to change this back. Let's just do this. Save the changes, and then that's weird. I thought I already saved that password, but let's log out. And I'm going to sign up as a second user. Just use my main. So I'm just reusing this. That's why I got rid of it. Create my account, and now I'm going to try to go to /users/1/edit. So I should be able to do this. Let's go to /user/1. So this is fine. I'm a logged in user. I should be able to look at profiles of other users. But if I go to /user/1/edit, redirected without a flash. Right? That was not something that I should have been doing. By the way, this is a good example of a case where an automated test is even better than a browser, because it would be really difficult to issue a patch request directly to the update action. And the reason is because the way to do that is by going to this form, right? Going to slash, well, in this case I can go here. It's easy enough to issue this patch request as the right user, but remember, we're redirecting the edit page, so I can't even get to the form. So to do this in a browser, you'd probably have to edit the JavaScript or something. I'm not even sure how you do it. The easiest way would probably be to drop down to a terminal and issue a request with a command line client. But inside a test, we can just do this. We can just say patch, update, and then verify the right behavior. This is in really great shape. We've made major progress here with a nice security model and everything. But there's one refinement I'd like to add, and this is a personal pet peeve about behavior on the web sometimes. Let me show you. I'm sure you've encountered this before. Let's log out. Suppose I log out, and then I try to go to /users/1/edit. Right, it says please log in, so I log in. Now wait a minute, that's not where I was trying to go. I was trying to go to the edit page. So this is the sort of case where I really feel like this is not the right behavior. If you try to hit a page that's protected and then it prompts you to log in, it should redirect you to the place you were trying to get to. That's a behavior I like to call friendly forwarding. So what we're going to do is store the URL that people are trying to get to and then redirect them to that URL if it exists. And this is the kind of thing where you could go either way. You could implement this first, but this is the sort of thing I would probably implement with test-driven development ordinarily, so let's try that out. Let's think about where it goes. Well, we need a protected page to forward to, and we only have one protected page that can be rendered as a regular web page right now, which is edit. So that's here, test successful edit. So what we can do here is, instead of doing login as @user and then getting the edit user path, we can just reverse these. Do this. We can do get edit user path and then log in as the user. And then instead of asserting the template users edit, we should redirect to the edit user path. So it's redirected to edit user path of @user. Because we've changed the behavior, we should probably change this to test successful edit with friendly forwarding. So we get the path, but we're not logged in, so then we log in, and then we should be redirected not to the profile page, but to the edit user path. I'm going to save this. We'll go red. Good. One of the reasons it's nice to write a test here is because this test is really short. Like literally, we just swapped a couple lines and we replaced the rendering the template with this assert for redirection. But the implementation is actually a lot more complicated than this. So it's really nice to have this simple test, and once we get it to pass, we can be confident that things are working properly. Let's think about what we want to do here. So we've got here in the users controller, think about what's going on here. So we're getting the edit user path of @user. So that's getting routed to the edit action. But before it even gets there, it's being filtered by this before filter, logged in user. So unless logged in, we want to redirect them with this flash message. But before doing that, we should store the location of where they're trying to go. So I'm going to define a method for that. Of course, there is no such method yet. We have to define it, so that's going to go in the sessions helper. Let's store the location down here. So we want to persist this over potentially many requests, right? Someone might hit the page and then click around a little bit and then try to log in. So we actually want this to persist, at least for a little bit. And we have a way to do that. Remember, that's the way our regular sessions work. So instead of session of user ID, let's put in session of a different key. Let's just call it the forwarding URL. And now we have to figure out, well, how do we pull this URL out? And this is kind of tricky, so let me show you how it works. Let's take a look at what do we want to do here. Let's put a debugger in here. Save this, and let's go to log out. Let's go to one of those protected pages again, /user/1/edit. Oh, it actually worked inside the test. Look at that, that's pretty cool. That's not what I was looking for. Let's just do it in the browser. Go over here. So this is where the server's running. Now there's a special object called request. It's got a bunch of stuff in it. You can kind of scroll up and see. This has all kinds of useful information, but what we want is stored in request.url. This is the fully qualified URL of the page we're trying to get to. So we want something like this. But there's one subtlety, which is that we should only do this redirect if somebody's going to a page that actually involves rendering. So the redirect we're going to make, we're going to end up trying to redirect people to this URL, this forwarding URL. That's a GET request. So suppose someone somehow issued a patch request to this application. If we then tried to forward them there, it would be issuing a GET request to a URL that can't accept that kind of request. If that doesn't make sense, don't worry about it too much. This is a really subtle issue. The bottom line is that we only want to do this if this is a GET request. And the way to do that, we can test it here. Request.get ? There's a Boolean that returns true if this is a GET request. So we can say if request.get. So it stores the location. Get rid of the debugger. Release that, release that. And now think about where this redirect is going to happen. So remember, we're right now redirecting users who log in to their profile page, and that happens in the sessions controller. Right, this controller for new sessions. So we do this, we create a session, we log the user in, and then redirect to the user's profile page. So we're going to change this line here. Instead of redirecting to the user, we're going to redirect back to the forwarding URL. Redirect back to this place they were trying to get to. Redirect back, or some default. So here we're going to do redirect back, or the default being the user's profile page. Of course, that means we have to define this helper. This is a common thing. This is the way most people I know develop. You just say, well, let's just assume we have a method called redirect back, or that's what it's going to look like, and now I have to define it. So let's put it in here. And it takes in a default, which right here is the user. And let's redirect to, use parens here because I'm going to put an or in. We're going to either redirect to this here, the sessions of forwarding URL. But remember, if this key doesn't exist, then this thing will give you nil. It's just like a hash. So we can just put in or the default. But of course, we want to now get rid of this forwarding URL in the session now that we've done the forward, so we should delete the key. Now at this point you might worry that, well, if we redirect here, does this line even get called? And the answer is yes, that this redirect actually doesn't happen right away. It happens only when we hit the end part of this. So all of the lines after the redirect are executed. That's a potential security hole, by the way. You have to be careful about this because it's tempting to think if you redirect that nothing else happens. But if there was something really dangerous down here, it would still be executed. So you should be careful about that. Let's save these and see if it's working. Let's double check, run the whole test suite. All right. So here's our test. Let's actually verify it in the browser. Go to here. Ask me to log in. Should redirect me to the update profile page. There it goes. By the way, you might have noticed that we didn't actually test for this thing here. Where is it? It's in the sessions helper. We have not actually tested that we delete this forwarding URL. So if you forgot this, users would be redirected to the forwarding URL until they ended the session by closing the browser. And writing a test for that is left as an exercise. But we can see that it's working in the browser by logging out, logging back in, and this should now redirect to the profile page and not to the user edit page. Yep, great. That completes the edit and update functionality. Things are working really nicely now. We've got these two actions that allow us to update user information. They're protected against non-logged in users and against incorrect users. And we've implemented this nice friendly forwarding so that users get redirected to the pages they're actually trying to get to. Our next step is to define a page to show all of the users on our application. Let's take a look at a mock-up of that. This is the user's index. It lists all of the users, and it will have their gravatar images with a link to their profile. Of course, the gravatar should also probably be linked to the profile. And because there might potentially be a lot of different users, the mockup shows pagination links, indicating that not all the users get shown on one page, but rather that they get divided into more manageable chunks. Let's get started with a test for access control for the user's index. We'll choose the same basic model as Twitter, which is that will allow anyone to view a user's profile page, even if they're not logged in, but will require user login to view the user's index. So we can go to our user's controller test, add a test for that. I'm going to put it at the top of the file, actually. There's kind of a standard ordering of the different REST actions, and so I'm going to put the test for the index action here at the top, because that's usually what goes first. It should be the same basic kind of test as the edit test here. It should redirect index when not logged in. It's the same basic thing. We're going to say get index action insert redirected to login URL. Of course, it should be read at first. And to get this to pass, we can just add index to this list. Should be green. Nope, still red. Oh, it's red because we haven't defined the index action yet. You can see the action index could not be found right here. Now we should be green. Great. Now let's think about what this index is going to be. Eventually we're going to paginate these users, as we saw in the mockup, but let's start out just by defining a users variable at users that's equal to all the users. And then we'll make an index view that will render all the users. So let's go to here. We want to go to app views, users, and we just need an index here. Let's recall what these look like, these views for the users. Let's look at the show page. So we've got this provide line at the top. Provides the title, and we'll just call this all users. And then let's give it an H1. Same thing. And the users, we can think of them as either an ordered list or an unordered list, especially because we haven't fixed an order. I'm just going to make them a UL right now. It's unordered list, and let's give it a class of users. So the way to do this is to iterate through the users. Here's users controller. All right, so by virtue of this instance variable, here we have an instance variable automatically here in the view. Iterate through at users.each, do user, and then let's make a list item for each user. Remember from our mockup what this is going to look like. Basically, we're going to have the gravatar for the user and then a link to the profile. And I want to change the size of the gravatar on the user's page. So I'm going to give it an optional argument here. We're going to have to change the gravatar for helper. This was actually an exercise in the book, but now we'll see the solution to that. And then link to the user's name. Remember, that's escaped out automatically. And then the link itself will be the user path of the user, like this. But as usual, we can omit this part and just write user. Okay, so let's go to the gravatar for helper that's in the user's helper. So what we want to do is give this an optional argument. And let's make the default size 80, which is actually the default size for gravatar. So we've got an options hash here with a default size, and then inside here we'll make size equal to the options size, and then we can put it inside here. This is the way gravatar works. It's query parameter question mark s equals, and then we can interpolate size. You can see down here that I'm in the 81st column right here, which means that this is 80 columns exactly. So I'm not going to bother putting in a new line. And so this should be working, I think. Let's take a look at it. So it's at /users. All right, well, there are only 2 users. It's kind of sad. And the styling is all wrong, but it's basically working. So let's put in some CSS to get that styling to work. Just going to put this at the bottom here. This is pretty short. I can just type this in. The style none will get rid of this little bullet point there. You can see that. And then an li. Border on the bottom, solid gray lighter. So let's see how that looks. All right, that's a lot better. Of course, I had to type in the URL there, but it would be nice to be able to click on this user's link. So let's do that. That's in the header. And that's right here, link to users. You can look over here at our table. That's at the user's path. So do user's path. All right, you can click on this now. Well, actually, let's click over here and then click on the users. All right, it's working. So this is great. We have a basically functioning users index here. But of course, it would be really nice when developing this application, especially when styling it, to get some sense of what it's really going to look like. And unfortunately, having only 2 users isn't sufficient. Of course, we could add these users by hand, but that's incredibly cumbersome. And it's also the sort of thing that if for any reason we needed to blow away our development database, which is a pretty common thing to have to do, then we would have to rebuild it by hand. So it's pretty clear that it's a nice idea to seed this sample application with some sample data. Rails has a standard way of doing this. There's a file called dbseeds, so let's take a look at that. And close these things down. So we're going to go into dbseeds. What we're going to do is create a bunch of sample users like this. So we're going to start by creating a user that has special status. This is the one we've been using in terms of the email address, and this will also be the administrative user later on in this lesson. So let's start with name, example user, email, let's put a space in here. And note here I've used the user.createBang method. So this bang causes this method to raise an exception if it doesn't work, if it fails for any reason, which is really nice because it tells you right away that something's wrong. I sometimes refer to these as noisy methods. And now we're going to use a cool method on fixed nums. This is basically on an integer. We're going to make 99 new users by calling 99 times, 99 dot times, do, and then the number. And then we're going to put a create in there too. Paste this in, tab it over. So now that we're inside here, let's think about what we want to do. Well, we want to give it a name. And we want the names to be unique and also more or less realistic. There's a cool gem called Faker that was installed as part of the gem file. Let me show you how to use that. So we'll make a fake name, Faker name, so Faker : name dot name. By the way, we've seen these colons before. Don't worry about what that means. It's not important at this stage. This is the kind of thing you learn in a pure Ruby book. And I'm going to give these email addresses something that depends on the number, because I've actually associated a few of these with non-default gravitars, n+1. So this starts off at 0, so this is going to be example 1, and then so on, 1 up to 100. At railstutorial.org. And now let's create a user with that name and that email. Oh, and I'm going to be typing this in, so I used foobar because that's my favorite default password, but I actually want this to be just password. Alright, the way we use this seed file is like this. It's rake dbmigrate reset first to reset the database. And this is the kind of thing that often requires restarting the server, so I'm just going to Control-C out of it to start with. So reset the database. And now we run rake dbseed. That runs this file, and if it doesn't work, then we'll get an exception, but I think it'll probably work. All right, that looks good. Let's see how it affects our application to restart the server. refresh, see how it looks. All right. You can see here that I've associated the first 5 users with gravitars, and then we've got the default gravatar the rest of the way down. That's great. Of course, before we had the problem of too few users, but now we've got too many. This is 100 displayed on just one page. So let's add that pagination I mentioned before. The gem file includes a really useful gem called will paginate. I'll show you how to use that. So we want to open the index view. And all you need to do with will paginate is this. It's really amazingly short. It's hard to believe this will work. It won't quite work by itself. There's one thing we'll have to do. The only thing we need to do to get this to work is to change user.all to user.paginate, and then give it to the page. So this is page, and will paginate automatically generates a params key called page. So this is params of page. There's quite a bit of magic going on here, and Ruby is so flexible that the will paginate gem does all kinds of amazing things. So it automatically adds this paginate method to user. Of course, will paginate doesn't know anything specifically about the user model. It's actually adding paginate to every active record object. And in here, what's happening is that will paginate knows, because this is the user's controller, that it should try to paginate users. Let's save the user's controller and then see what the page looks like. Go here and refresh. And there we go. This is what will paginate gives us. You can see the pagination links at the top and at the bottom. Click to next. Also click on one of the numbers. You can see here in the URL, there's a question mark for a query parameter page equals 1, 2, and so on. The default, if this is nil, so this in here, if params of page is nil, it's automatically just the first page, like this. You can count these if you want, and you can verify that there are 30 of them, but there's a quicker way to see that. If we go here, we can do user.paginate right here in the console. We've reseeded the database since we started up this console, so we might have to quit out a bit. Alright, time for the heavy guns. I'm just going to kill that process. So here it is. Before I kill it, let's see if it's there. It's still dying. Let's kill it. Boy, it refuses to die. There we go. Let's try that again. Of course, that just dumped a bunch of users to the screen. So let's scroll up, see what the SQL was. So you can see here, user.paginate. It says select users.star from users, limit 30, offset 0. Look at page 2. That's limit 30, offset 30. So it's just going through the users 30 at a time. So if we do this, oops, at users doesn't have a count method, maybe length. Oh, there's no at user. At users.count. There we go. That's weird. It's so it looks like it actually is returning for count the full number in the database. So I bet count and length are different. They're usually the same for arrays, but this is not an array. Yeah, so at users.length is the length of these users, but if you count them, it actually counts the total number. That's kind of strange because for an array, they're the same. If you do like this, But in fact, at users is not an array. It's a user active record relation. So link 30, but if we ask it to count, in fact, it counts all of the users in the database. Probably the reason for that is because user.count, in fact, also counts the total number of users. We can even do this. We can do at user. We can do this. We can do user.paginate page2.count, and you can see, in fact, it's just executing count through the relation. So it's just counting all of the users. In any case, using paginate like this lets us display only 30 users at a time and go through them with these convenient links. So now that we've got it working, let's write a short integration test to codify this behavior. I'm going to make a new integration test for this. We could put it somewhere else, but I like the idea that the index page gets its own test file. It's called the user's index test. Oops, and remember, we don't need the underscore test there. That gets put on automatically. Let's open it up. There it is. So what do we need here? Let's do test. Let's test the index, including pagination. And it's definitely required for us to log in, right? Because this is a protected page. So let's do that. Let's put in an @user from the fixtures. And then log in as that user. All right, what happens if we log in as the user? Well, let's get the user's path. And it should render the template's user's index. And what else should happen on this page? I want to make sure that the pagination is basically working. So let's take a look at this. I'm going to inspect this element. I want to test for something related to pagination. And here we go. There's a div here that has class pagination that's put in automatically by will paginate. So let's test for that, just to make sure the pagination has appeared. So it's a div with class pagination. And then for each of the users, let's test that there's a link to the user's profile page with content equal to the name. So that's for each of these. Let's just do the first page. Insert select A and user.name. And actually, let's put this in here. We can do that. And will this work? I'm actually not sure if this will work. Well, so this test is going to fail for a different reason. You may already have spotted it. The problem is that our test database only has 2 users. If you look at our YAML file, we've only got these 2 users. So I don't remember offhand actually if this will work. So let's do this. User path of user will definitely work. And text user.name. I think this is the right syntax. So let's try this out. This will probably go red. I mean, it better go red. Okay, we need at least enough users to trigger pagination. So that's 30 at minimum. And I actually want to add a few more. I'm just going to add a couple by hand. These are just named users that we might be able to use in other contexts. So I'm going to say Lana is here, and this is Mallory. And now I want to arrange for there to be definitely at least 30. So rather than having to subtract 4 from something, I'm just going to make 30. That's definitely going to trigger the pagination. So we've seen before in this context with the user.digest that we can use embedded Ruby inside of these fixtures. So that suggests doing this. Just create 30 users, 30.times do n. This is similar to what we did in the seeds file, right? Just like here. And then let's create user n. So that's going to be user 0 up to 29. Should be tabbed in. Oh, no, it shouldn't be. It's like this. We're just doing this sort of thing, except inside of embedded Ruby. It'll be clear if I put an end here. So user number n and then name. Doesn't really matter what the name is, so let's just do this. We want them to be distinct. It doesn't really matter if they're distinct either, but it's easier to test if they are. And it makes this test better, right? We're testing for the text here, so it would be nice if they're all distinct. So let's just have it be user n. And email also doesn't really matter. So let's have it be user n at example.com. And of course the password digest is the same, so let's just copy that. Save that, and let's just save this over here and see if it works at this point. So there's a parsing error. It's line 25. Oh, I just put in too much space there. YAML is sensitive to white space, so that's what happened there. All right, now it's passing. So we can get rid of this here. I want to see if this passes. Nope, so we do need the user path. I think we saw that once before. And let me see if we need this. I'm not 100% sure if we need that or not. All right, so this works. It's probably a little clearer to leave this text here, so I'm going to do that. Let's rerun the whole suite. Great, so now if we break something here, if we get rid of this here, we're not testing for both of these, but that's not the sort of thing we necessarily want to test for. We could though, we could put a count here, count 2. All right, so that failed, that's good. We're not testing for the presence of the gravatar. Again, this is the sort of thing that visually will show up right away, but we could add that if we wanted to. But this will fail if I comment that out. Great. There are automated tools, by the way, that will do things like that, that will just go through your source code and change lines and make sure that it actually breaks the test suite. Okay, this is a working tested index page. There's just one more thing I want to do now that we have a good test suite. I want to refactor this thing because there's a really cool way of rendering a bunch of user objects like this, or a bunch of active record objects. It relies on defining a partial with a special name. So I'm going to go to here, add a new file, and I'm going to call it underscore user.html.erb. It's important that it have the same name as the class. And inside here, I'm going to just put this, or is it this li? This is the HTML to render a user. And then in here, I'm going to render that partial. Now you can do this. We can remember how we've rendered things before. We do render and then the name of the partial, so we could do this. User/user. We don't include the underscore, the leading underscore. And at this point, we also have to pass the variable over here. So this has a user variable in the user partial. So we need to pass that. So this is still passing. By the way, it's important to emphasize that this user here is the same as this variable, but this name is kind of arbitrary. What's important is that these two match. So this will still pass. So this is the way that you render a partial with a local variable. But it turns out that we can do even better than this. We can just get rid of all this stuff here. Rails will automatically render a partial with the name corresponding to the class of this object. So I'm going to keep it as foobar for now. I would never do this in real life, but just for purposes of illustration, you can see this still passes. And in fact, we can do even better than this. We can get rid of this here, get rid of this, get rid of this, and render @users. So it's incredibly compact. What's going on here is that Rails sees this collection and knows to iterate through them, calling the partial corresponding to the class name of each of these objects. In this case, user, so it's looking for this underscore user template, this partial, and then it's rendering each one in turn. As you can see from running the test suite, everything still works. We can also look at the actual application. It's always a nice sanity check. There we go. At this point, we've added all of the actions except one from the standard set of REST actions. Let's take a look at the table again. So far, we've made the show, new, create, edit, update. We just added index, and now the only one left is destroy. Because this is such a dangerous power to be able to destroy users, before adding the code necessary to do that, we're going to create a new class of user called an administrative user, or admin for short. To get a sense of where we're going, let's take a look at a mockup. This is the mockup of the current user's index. So what we're going to do is add delete links that will be visible only to admins. And when an admin clicks on delete link, it'll destroy the user. To get started with admins, let's take a look at the data model. In the last lesson, we added the remember digest attribute. Now we're going to add an admin, and it's going to be a Boolean. As we'll see, this will give us a special Boolean method to determine whether or not a user is an admin. So let's make a migration corresponding to that data model. So add admin to users, and then admin Boolean. This is the type here. Let's take a look at that. Because we used two users in the migration, it knew to put it on the users table, and then admin : Boolean gave us this. We saw that before with the remember digest most recently. There's one change I want to make here, which is to give this a default value. By default, users should be non-admins, so the default will be false. We don't actually have to do this, strictly speaking, because the default, so to speak, is nil, which is false in a Boolean context. But especially with something potentially so sensitive, I feel like it's best to be explicit. Save that, and let's run the migration. Bundle exec. We can see the effects of that in the console. Should probably quit out of this because we changed the data model. Let's pull out the first user. We can see that it's not an admin. So here we've got admin false. User.admin question mark is false. We can toggle this, toggle bang, and then give it the attribute. Toggle bang is a method to toggle booleans. Oh, why didn't that work? Nope, I typed an attribute. I said attribute and then typed it. I want the attribute to be admin. There we go. Now user.admin question mark is true. It's probably best to do this sort of experimentation in a sandbox in general. But in this case, it doesn't really matter because we're about to reset all of the development users anyway. Speaking of which, let's close this down here, this server, and then I want to go to the seeds and make the first user an admin. This server is just hanging, so I'm going to kill it. There it is, so let's kill that thing. That might not have been necessary. It looks like it might just have exited. But in any case, oh, I don't actually want to do that though. Okay, now I want to add an admin. Here we go. Admin, true. And now here I'm going to do the reset and the seed. Now our first user should be an admin. Restart the console. Great. We're now in a position to understand why it's so important to use strong parameters here in the user's controller. Recall that that's the name for this sort of thing, this params.require and permit. If we look at the list of permitted attributes, notice that admin is not on the list. But suppose it were. Suppose we had admin here. Now if someone issued a patch request to, say, /users/17, so suppose we had a command like this, patch. You could define this using something like curl. If you were to issue a patch request directly to this URL, this would actually set the admin flag to true for this user. So any user with an account on the site would be able to change any other user, in particular change their own user, into an admin. So of course I don't actually want this, but this is the first step toward writing a test that the admin attribute is not one of these permitted attributes, and that's left as an exercise. At this point, we're ready to add those delete links from the mockup here and the corresponding destroy action. So let's do that. Those are going to go in the user partial because each user will have a delete link. And we only want to display these for admin, so let's do this. if current user dot admin, and let's have users not see delete links for themselves, so we can say and not current user question mark user, so this user here, this local user. So if the current user is an admin and the current user is not equal to the user that's being rendered, then we're going to display a link. I'm just going to put a vertical pipe character as a visual way to distinguish the link from the name. Link to delete. We want to link to the user. Okay, so that's not obvious. Let's take a look at this table. We want to link to /user/1, and that is the user path of user, which we can write just user for short, but it corresponds to a delete request. If we don't have a delete request, then it's a normal GET request and it will go to the user show page. So by itself, this link would be to the user show page, but what we can do is add method delete. We've actually seen this once before. Let me show you. Oh, look at that. It's slightly inconsistent. So we have this logout link, and here we used the string delete. It's probably slightly more conventional to use the symbol. They are equivalent in this context. So let me save that. But remember, we used the method delete for the logout path here. And that's because logout responds to the delete request. Now, the response of the destroy action to delete request is implicit in this resources users. So here's the method delete, and there's one extra thing. Because this is a dangerous operation, I want to add the verification. This is just a little bit of JavaScript, essentially, that Rails will put in. Just make sure that they're sure, and then close it off, and that should work. Let's take a look. Oh, right, I forgot to start up the server again. It should be here. There we go. The delete links appear. Remember, I'm logged in as the first user here. So that means that because the first user is an admin, I see these links. You can see right here, the delete link does not appear for the user who's logged in. It's great. If I click on this, it'll give me the are you sure? You sure? Okay, yeah, I'm sure. And of course, now this is being routed to the destroy action. Look at our table here. So this is a delete request to /user/1, and that's being routed to the destroy action. So let's add that. It's the last one here in the file. As usual, there's a params hash. We actually don't see it here, but we've got params of ID, so let's find that user. Okay, and now let's just call destroy on that. It'll destroy the user. Let's make a flash note, flash success. User deleted, and let's redirect back to the same URL, back to the user's index. Actually, let's go back here. That actually would have worked. So let's delete this user here. Okay. User deleted, and you can see that user's gone now. Now at this point, only admins can see these delete links, but there's nothing to prevent someone from issuing a direct delete request. In a similar way that someone could issue a patch request to update a user and turn it into an admin if we accidentally put in the admin attribute here. Right now, any logged in user, in fact any user at all, they don't even have to be logged in, can issue a delete request to the destroy action and destroy any user. So to prevent that from happening, first of all, we're going to require that these users be logged in. So let's add this to the list before action index edit update destroy, and let's add a second filter for destroy, so the third filter overall, to verify that the user is an admin. So before action, we'll call it admin user, and this is going to be only the destroy action. You can see we don't have to put it in an array, we can just leave it by itself if there's only one. So down here, confirms an admin user. We'll redirect to the root URL. That's the place we've been redirecting when someone does something they shouldn't, like up here. So redirect to root URL instead of unless current user at user, we're going to say unless current user dot admin question mark. Of course, it's hard to tell that this is working, and indeed, generally speaking, this is such a dangerous ability that we should really write some tests for this. So let me show you how to do that. We'll start by editing the users.yaml. We want to make one of our fixture users an admin, so let's go to here, make Michael example an admin, admin true. And before we've been putting these access control tests in the controller level, so the user's controller test, so let's continue with that practice. So let's do this. Test should redirect destroy when not logged in. So we can do this, assert redirected to login URL. But I want to go a step further and actually assert that there is no change in the user count. Remember, that's assert no difference. We saw this once before. Let me show you. It's in the user signup test. We verified that invalid signup information does not change the user count. So assert no difference. And here we're going to do the same thing, user.count. Remember, what goes inside this block is the thing that won't change that account. And in this case, we're going to issue a delete request directly to the destroy action. And the ID is @user. This should be passing. And now let's test the other filter. This is here that we want to make sure the user is an admin. So let's log in as the other user. Right up here, we've got this other user is not an admin. Only the first of the fixture users is an admin, just the first one here. Log in as the other user. And we want the same thing here, just the same behavior. Oh no, it's not exactly the same, right? Because here the user should be prompted to log in, but here the user is actually redirected to the root URL. So that should work. There we go. Now at this point, with something so delicate and so important as controlling the ability to delete users, I really like to go in just to double check and verify that if I change the code, it'll go red. Save it, go green. Comment this out, go red. uncommented, go green. So it doesn't take very long, but now I'm very confident that these tests will catch any regressions in the model we're using to restrict access to the destroy action. This is a great test for this low-level access control, but I do want to have an integration test as well that basically simulates the going in and clicking on the delete link. So let's put that in the user's index test. When actually, I'm just going to put it in the same test. I'm going to say that this is the index as an admin, including pagination and delete links. And I'm going to put an admin in here. And then the non-admin will be the other user. Actually, it could be any of them, but let's just use Archer. Let's make a test. The index as non-admin. We've already checked that non-admins can't hit this destroy action, but we haven't verified that, say, the links don't appear. So let's go here and log in as the admin. Get the user's path, assert the template. This is all the same. What we want to do is inside here, assert that there's a delete link. So let's make a variable for this. Let's just pull out the first page of users like this, and then iterate through. And we can just do this here, copy. It's going to be the same path. The text is going to be delete, and the method should be delete. It's not too surprising that there's a failure, because remember that admins don't have delete links. So let's put this inside an unless user equals @user or @admin. Let's tab this over, and so we should make this assertion only if the user is not an admin. All right, so that's now passing. That's great. So this tests for each of these delete links. And let's actually issue a delete request to make sure that it actually deletes the user. So let's do this here. We want to assert a difference of -1 in the user count to indicate that one disappears. And let's just send a delete request to the user path. Remember, that's this here. And let's issue the delete request to the user path of non-admin. So all we have to do now is just fill this in here, test index as non-admin. This is a lot easier. We just want to log in as the non-admin. Actually, we can just copy this here. It's almost the same. These two things are the same, except for the identity of the user. So this is non-admin, and then all we want to do is just assert that there are no delete links. So let's say assert select, anchor tag with text of delete, and the count of those should be 0. All right. Oh, and I just realized there's one little refinement we want to add. I mentioned way back when we were discussing the user's index that we wanted to link the gravatars to the users. So let's do that. Let's link to the gravatar for the user, and then the URL should be the user path. We can just type user. Now this looks kind of weird. It just to have user size 50 user. It should look weird. This is difficult to parse visually, and indeed Ruby will have trouble parsing it. You can see here we get a syntax error. So in order to make this unambiguous, we need to put in parentheses to indicate which things are the argument of the gravatar for method. So we can do this. There we go. Should be green now. Great. And now if we go to our application and refresh the user's index, we should be able to click on these. Great. All right, at this point, we've completed all of the REST actions for the user's resource. Let's rerun the full test suite just one more time. And now we're ready to make a commit and merge our changes into the master branch. Now we can push it up to Bitbucket. I'm just going to run the test suite once before deploying to Heroku. Should work, but yeah. And now I want to push up to Heroku to deploy it to production, and then we're going to reset the database and actually run the seed data at Heroku. Of course, you wouldn't ordinarily do this on a production site, but it'll be nice to have sample data. All right, let's reset the database. Actually, let's go here. I just want to go to the URL while it's there. Let's reset the database. That's Heroku PG reset database. It'll ask me for confirmation. Now let's run the migration. Heroku run rake db migrate. Oops, db migrate. And then we can do db seed. All right, let's see if that works. Sometimes you have to restart it, so you might have to do that. Let's log in. There it is, /users, all of the users in the database. and they're working just like they were locally. If this doesn't work for you, you can try this. Heroku restart just restarts the Heroku server. You can see here that I'm logged in as an admin, so the delete links are here. Let's see what happens. This is the same picture. Let's delete this one again. Of course, I can also edit the settings here. All right. So everything is working in production, and now we're ready to move on to the final step in the core part of the application, which is to implement account activation and password reset. And after that, we'll be ready to add user microposts and following users.